All right, so diving in, welcome to the deep dive. Um, we take the sources you give us and we really, extract the key insights. That way you can just jump right in and be truly well-informed. Today, we're going to look at the world of Bob Camblin. You sent us a really cool collection of stuff, his own writings, a biography, some thoughts on his book Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, a YouTube discussion on Spavana, one of his works, and even a book review. Wow, that's quite a bit.
Yeah, it's a great mix.
So our goal today is to, really get Camblin's vision, like his artistic and philosophical vision. Explore his art, his life, how he created things, how he saw the world. It's a really cool blend of art and philosophy.
Definitely. And I think it'll be really interesting to see how those two things kind of come together in his work. Right off the bat, what's really striking about Cameron's journey is how broad it is, you
Yeah.
know? It wasn't this straight line from A to B. Like, the biography talks about how he started at the Kansas City Art Institute, then the super important period in Italy on a Fulbright
A
scholarship.
Fulbright, wow.
Yeah. And beyond just seeing the works of the mentors, he spent time at the Capuchin catacombs in Palermo. Those images of like preservation but also decay, they really stuck with him. That's a thing that pops up again and again when people talk about his art.
Yeah, I can see how that would make an impact.
Totally. So after Italy, he had a pretty long teaching career, moved around a bit, Ringling School of Art, University of Illinois, then finally landed at Rice. But then things get interesting.
What happened?
Well, in 1976, he just up and leaves academia to be a nomadic artist.
Wow, what a change.
Right. Imagine like traveling through Italy, France, Mexico, even the South Pacific, all funded by selling your art. And he was like super productive, worked in all kinds of mediums, oils, acrylics, watercolors, drawings, even painted paper. The biography says his work is actually pretty rare, highly sought after by collectors. I think that limited access actually makes his work even more powerful when you do get to see it. Like, it forces you to, really look closer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That scarcity definitely adds to the mystique. And when we start looking at the main themes in his work and his writing, we can see how this unconventional life really shaped how he saw things.
Yeah.
There's this big focus on interconnectedness and impermanence. The YouTube transcript and that excerpt from Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, they both talk about his painting Spavana.
Yeah.
There's this fascinating blend of organic stuff and mechanical stuff, these kind of hybrid beings in these states of transformation and decay. So, breaking away from a traditional life really fueled his artistic exploration of these fleeting moments and the interconnectedness of different environments.
Right. And Spavana is a really great example of that.
Yeah, let's dig into Spavana a little more. The transcript describes one panel as this figure. There's part human, part plant, part machine. And the other panel is a skeleton, but with a clear catfish vibe. And it's all done in these earthy tones, really gives you that feeling of entropy. And you're right, it fits so well with Zen philosophy, this idea that all forms are interdependent and ultimately, without a fixed self. That's shunyata, right?
Exactly.
It's about dissolving those boundaries we see between what's natural and what's artificial.
Right, like realizing a wave in the ocean isn't really separate from the ocean itself.
Yeah, exactly.
And the textures in Spavana, all weathered and decaying, that directly reflects the Zen acceptance of impermanence, the fact that everything changes, the way the vines and machinery are all tangled up in that left panel. It's such a perfect symbol of humanity and nature coexisting, not really being separate. It totally aligns with the Zen idea of living in harmony with the constant flow of existence. Like, what we see as destruction and creation, they're just two sides of the same coin, really.
And then there's that connection to the I Ching, specifically hexagram 18, work on what has been spoiled. The transcript and the book excerpts both bring that up. Those broken down, decaying objects in Spavana, they could symbolize that need to, deal with neglect, whether it's in the environment, society, or even within ourselves, and to take part in renewing things. It's that whole cyclical idea that decay leads to rebirth.
Yeah, that's really important. Decay isn't the end. It's part of a larger process. That skeletal, almost fossilized fish structure, it's a powerful metaphor. The remains of what used to thrive become the foundation for new growth.
Right.
And that really echoes the wisdom of the I Ching, embracing change and regeneration. And it's not just Spavana. The transcript mentions how it's similar to other pieces like Spavana Ancestor 2 and Roma. He keeps coming back to this idea of entropy and renewal.
Now, the book review of The Art of Everything brings up another interesting aspect, Camblin's fascination with duality and paradox. The reviewer calls his drawings, let me get this right, paradox is made visible and riddles disguised as structures.
Oh, I like that.
Right. They talk about concepts like a trap that does not trap. It really makes you think, question your first impression.
What's really cool is how Camblin uses these visual paradoxes to make you think deeper. It's not just about aesthetics, it's deliberate. He wants to shake up how we usually see and understand the world. It's kind of like Zen koans, those paradoxical statements or questions that Zen practice uses to provoke doubt and maybe even lead to moments of enlightenment.
Now, Camblin's own philosophy about art was always evolving. He started with abstract impressionism, but then moved into this uh, Muchas Volantes style.
Musha volantes.
Yeah, using dots and dashes to create optical illusions. The biography says he did this in the 1980s, collaborating with Nancy Giordano. They drew inspiration from Dadaism, surrealism, even artists like Escher and Dali. Muchos volantes, it means, flying flies or eye floaters. And it often involves these dense patterns of small elements that create a kind of shimmering or vibrating effect. It plays with how you see things.
Right, Dadaism and surrealism were all about rejecting traditional art and embracing the illogical, the absurd, and the power of the subconscious.
Right. And this Muchos volantes style really requires the viewer to, participate in making meaning from the work.
Yeah, it's not just passive viewing. You have to actively engage with it. And this shift in style shows how he constantly questioned artistic conventions. Even earlier in his career, he was doing these collaborative events with Earl Staley and Joe Tate. They call themselves B&E Productions and the holding firm.
Those names.
Right. The biography and that quote from Earl Staley at the end really highlight this experimental spirit. It wasn't about the finished product. It was about the process of creating. And then there's the whole thing with signing his work as anonymous or even using the Mr. Peanut costume. It's like he was trying to, erase his own ego.
The Mr. Peanut costume. The biography talks about how he'd show up in that costume and sign his work as Mr. Peanut, later just anonymous. That's such a bold statement, like separating the artist from the art. And then later, he starts hiding meanings and surprises in his paintings. The idea that like a secret image might pop up decades later, confusing the viewer at first, but then maybe leading to a deeper understanding.
It's like a delayed reaction, That's so interesting, this idea of hidden meanings and delayed revelations. It suggests that Camblin wasn't just making images for people to look at quickly and move on. He was embedding layers that take time and effort to uncover. Like, he believed art should be a process of discovery, not just a static thing.
The Zen influence is clear. I mean, the title of the book, Zen and the Art of Enlightenment, says it all. The foreword and the book review both emphasize how his art and writing were about achieving everyday enlightenment, questioning how we see things, embracing the fact that everything changes, just like we saw in Spavinaw, and always looking inward. The biography even mentions that he was a huge reader, especially of the I Ching and haiku poetry, and his art often reflects that simplicity and those profound observations you find in haiku.
And his connection to those philosophies wasn't just surface level, His whole approach to creating art, even the way he lived, it was all intertwined with those principles. The Zen concept of just seeing, it really resonates with how he wanted to move past just intellectual interpretations and towards a more direct, intuitive experience of art and life.
He definitely had strong opinions about the art world, too. The biography talks about how much he hated the idea of painting for money. And there's that story about the patron who insisted on sealing $100 bills in a blown glass tube because they didn't want to actually touch the money when paying him.
Wow.
Yeah. And he believed that words actually got in the way of experiencing art, kind of like Tom Wolfe's critique in The Painted Word. Even the text in his drawings, according to the biography, could be intentionally misleading, part of what he called his guerrilla warfare on a visually saturated, word-oriented culture.
Interesting. So the words are there, but they might not be telling the whole story or even the right story. It's like another layer of the puzzle he's presenting.
Exactly.
That resistance to the business side of art and his skepticism about explaining art with words, it's all about that focus on direct experience. Like, art should speak for itself, maybe on a more intuitive level, even subconscious.
And his work was also very personal, autobiographical. Carolyn Farb, in the biography, she says every image he created was primarily autobiographical, a narrative of his life. We see the influence of his childhood in Ponca City, the grandeur of the Marland estate, the pioneer woman statue. There are even those subtle double V's in his work, a nod to his mother, Viva.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, and then his time in Italy, his relationships, all of that found its way into his art.
It adds another dimension to his work. It's not just abstract ideas. It's rooted in his life, his experiences, what he saw. It's both universal and deeply personal.
Absolutely. And we can't forget his collaborative side. Those partnerships as B&E Productions and the holding firm, Earl Staley and Joe Tate. The biography and Earl's quote really show how dynamic those relationships were. It wasn't just about creating together. There were intense talks, arguments, laughter, and a lot of experimentation. Like that tattoo show they did long before tattoos were mainstream.
Yeah, way ahead of their time with that one.
It really highlights his engagement with the creative community and a real drive to push boundaries.
Those collaborations were clearly important for him. They show how willing he was to work with other artists, challenge his own ideas through dialogue and creation. The holding firm, that one sounds really fascinating, knocking down walls and building towers without permission. It speaks to a kind of rebellious and experimental energy that really defined how he worked.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So finally, let's talk about his legacy. Pete Gershon, in the biography, he calls Camblin a mystical trickster figure, ripe for rediscovery by new generations. People are still interested in his work and their efforts to organize exhibitions. Even though he became more reclusive later in life, his impact on the Houston art scene and probably beyond is huge.
Yeah, for sure. He constantly questioned the norms, blended philosophy and art in a unique way, and always emphasized the viewer's role in the experience. That's stuff that still resonates with artists and audiences today. The mystical trickster label really fits him too. It captures that enigmatic personality and the playful, thought-provoking nature of his work.
And there are all these great little details scattered throughout the sources, like he was always reading, even during art classes. Imagine that, always learning, making connections.
I know, right?
And his idea of turning a stumbling block into a stepping stone, represented by those paintings of jars of water, it's such a powerful metaphor for resilience.
Totally.
And Earl Staley describing Camblin's studio as a wizard's den, full of all this weird and wonderful stuff. You can practically picture it, this hub of creative chaos.
Those details really bring him to life. The reading during class shows how curious his mind was. The stumbling block paintings give us a glimpse into his personal philosophy, and the wizard's den that perfectly captures the sense of wonder and unconventionality that surrounded his art.
And then this incredible idea that his paintings might hang for years before a secret image appears, that's just mind-blowing. It shows a level of depth and intention that's not so common in the art world.
It really does. It's like he's having a long conversation with the viewer, a reward for paying attention and maybe even changing your perspective over time.
So, to sum up our deep dive into Bob Camblin, we've seen his amazing artistic journey, his deep engagement with ideas of interconnectedness and impermanence, his challenging of artistic norms, his collaborative nature, and his very personal and often paradoxical approach to art. He wasn't just creating objects, he was inviting us to think and discover.
Exactly. He blurred the lines between seeing and knowing, challenged how we perceive things, and encouraged us to look deeper.
And this brings us to our final thought for you. Camblin really emphasized the difference between seeing and just looking, and how his work might have hidden layers. So what hidden messages might be in your own everyday experiences if you looked at them with more thought and fewer assumptions? How could embracing ambiguity and questioning the obvious lead to new insights in your life? It's about turning those stumbling blocks into stepping stones, right?
Absolutely.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive. We've covered a lot today.
We have.
It's been fascinating exploring the world of Bob Camblin.
Yeah, a truly unique artist and thinker.
I hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did. Until next time, keep diving deep.
And keep looking closely.
You never know what you might discover.